The sun was low in the sky as we wound our way up the narrow dirt road, trees pressing close on either side like silent sentries. Kamala sat beside me in the front seat, glancing at the map app on her phone. The road had grown narrower, barely more than a trail now, with deep tire ruts and overhanging branches. Joe, my oldest, was in the back seat, making faces at his younger brother, Alex, who squealed with delight. The excitement in the car was palpable. We had been talking about this trip for weeks, and the anticipation was finally bubbling over. We had heard about the campsite from an old friend of mine who had mentioned it with a kind of reverence, like it was a hidden gem few knew about. He had called it the Old Growth, a place where time seemed to slow, where you could get lost in the beauty of nature. I should have paid more attention to the way he hesitated before sharing the details. We arrived as the sun dipped below the tree line, casting the forest in deepening shades of amber and purple. Our campsite was nestled in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines and thick underbrush. It was perfect. Kamala stretched her arms, her eyes lighting up as she took in the surroundings, and I could see Joe and Alex already peeking around, eyes wide, eager to explore. After we set up the tent, Kamala and I took a moment to just breathe in the stillness. There was something truly magical about the forest, an ancient, unspoiled beauty that seemed to envelop us. It was so quiet. We could hear the soft rustling of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the faint whisper of the wind through the branches. As the twilight deepened, we built a campfire, and the flickering flames painted shadows across the trees. Joe and Alex toasted marshmallows, laughing and joking, the fire casting a warm glow on their faces. Kamala leaned against me, her hand in mine, and for a moment it felt like we had left the world behind, like this was a place only we could find. But as the night settled, the quiet began to change. I noticed at first a low hum, barely perceptible, like the vibration of a plucked string. I brushed it off, assuming it was the wind shifting through the trees. But then Joe stiffened, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the firelight, deep into the forest. "Dad, did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice a mixture of excitement and fear. I strained my ears, and there it was again, a faint scratching sound coming from the darkness. Kamala gave me a look, one that said, "Do something." Trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping over me, I stood up and shone my flashlight into the trees. "Probably just a raccoon or something," I said, my voice sounding thin even to myself. But the scratching sound grew louder, more insistent, like claws on bark. Suddenly, the forest felt less inviting, and a heavy silence settled over us. Joe and Alex fell silent, watching me with wide eyes. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But something in the shadows shifted, and I caught a flash of something with eyes that glowed faintly, watching us. "Okay, kids," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It's late. Let's get to bed." Kamala gathered the boys, but her gaze lingered on the forest edge. I could see the worry in her eyes, though she said nothing. We climbed into the tent, settling down for the night, but sleep came fitfully. The sounds outside seemed amplified, every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves making me jolt awake. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was standing outside the tent, drawn by a soft sound, a whisper, almost a beckoning. In the glow of the moonlight, I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the trees. Its shape was obscured by shadows, but it was tall, hunched, with long limbs that didn't seem quite right, as though it was neither fully human nor animal. Its eyes glowed with an unsettling intelligence, and yet there was something familiar about them. The creature didn't move, but somehow I felt its presence calling to me, urging me deeper into the forest. Without fully realizing what I was doing, I began to follow it, the forest closing around me, and I felt an inexplicable pull, like I was connected to this thing, this being. It led me to an old cabin, half hidden under layers of moss and vines, as though it had been abandoned for decades. Inside, the cabin was filled with strange artifacts, bones twisted into symbols, feathers and stones arranged in unnatural patterns, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. But it was the journal that caught my eye, lying on a table as though it had been left there just for me. The leather cover was worn, the pages yellowed, and I opened it, my heart pounding. The entries were chilling, recounting the story of a camper who had come to this forest years ago. He had encountered the creature just as I had, and described a sense of familiarity, of being drawn into its world. Each entry became more frantic, detailing strange occurrences and a growing paranoia. The final entry was barely legible, a frantic scrawl about a curse tied to the forest, a curse that could never be broken, only passed on. Suddenly, I heard my name, a faint whisper, coming from deep in the forest. I looked up, heart pounding, and found myself face to face with the creature. Its eyes, those glowing orbs, seemed to pierce through me, filling me with a chilling revelation. This creature was bound to the forest, cursed to roam it alone, forever seeking, what? Redemption? Release? As I stared into those eyes, a memory surfaced, one I couldn't place but felt woven into my own blood. I realized, with a cold shock, that this thing wasn't just a stranger, it was connected to me, bound by something older than time itself. A scream shattered the silence. It was Kamala. I spun around, but the creature stepped between me and the path back to the campsite. It was close now, close enough that I could see the twisted features, the blend of animal and human, a being suspended between two worlds. With a guttural growl, it lunged at me, and I fought, my mind flashing with images, my family, alone in the forest, afraid, waiting for me. I realized I had a choice, stay and fight, or return to my family, leave this place, and never look back. But something deep within me whispered that if I left, if I ran now, the forest would haunt me forever. I don't remember how I got out. I stumbled through the woods, somehow finding my way back to the campsite. But it was empty, the fire long dead, the tent abandoned. The only sign of my family was a single footprint in the dirt, one of Alex's small shoes lying abandoned nearby. I don't know how long I searched, calling their names, my voice breaking in the silence. But there was no answer, only the oppressive weight of the forest around me, watching, waiting. Now, back in the world of highways and cities, I am haunted. The memory of that creature, those eyes, the knowledge that I left something behind, a piece of myself, or worse, my family, gnaws at me every night. And sometimes, in the quiet hours, I feel it. The forest still watches, and one day, I know it will call me back. The night air was cold and sharp as I stepped out of my truck, the distant hum of the engine fading as I turned off the ignition. The forest loomed around me, just as dense and dark as it had been on that night. I had returned here for one reason, to find that creature again, to face whatever I had left behind in these woods. I'd spent months haunted by the memories, by nightmares that felt more real than anything I experienced in waking life. I had lost my family, lost my peace of mind, and now, returning here felt like the only way to reclaim something of myself. If the forest had taken them, I would make it give them back, or I'd stay lost myself. The air was thick with mist, and the trees seemed to lean in closer with every step I took down the narrow path. I'd come back prepared this time, flashlights, a knife, even a flare gun I'd borrowed from a friend. But none of these things felt like they'd be enough against whatever lay waiting in these woods. A low, almost imperceptible hum thrummed through the ground, and the sound made my teeth clench. It was the same feeling as before, like an invisible hand reaching out, brushing against my mind and my memories, calling me forward. I forced myself to push through the underbrush, each snap of a twig and rustle of leaves bringing back flashes of that night. I saw their faces in my mind, Kamala's look of worry, Joe's wide-eyed excitement, Alex clutching my hand. All I'd ever wanted was to give them a taste of nature, a simple camping trip, a break from the world, a moment to ourselves. But instead, I brought them here, to a place I didn't fully understand, a place bound by old, dark secrets. After what felt like hours, I found the clearing, though it looked different now. The fire pit we made was gone, overgrown by thick weeds, and the small stones we'd used to mark the edges were scattered, as if the forest had tried to reclaim it. I could barely make out any signs that we'd ever been here. The feeling of dread was stronger here, though. I could feel it pulsing around me, an almost sentient presence that knew I had come back. I forced myself to stand in the center of the clearing and spoke aloud, my voice sounding weak and foreign. "I'm here," I said, the words barely above a whisper. "I'm here for them." The silence that followed was crushing, like the forest was holding its breath, watching, waiting. My flashlight flickered, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. I took a shaky breath and moved deeper into the trees. The creature had taken me to the old cabin before, and I had a feeling it would do so again. Only this time, I was ready. I wasn't leaving without answers. The path to the cabin was twisted and overgrown, each step feeling like a step further into another world. The trees seemed larger, the shadows darker, and there was an unnatural stillness, as if all the animals had left. The cabin loomed before me, barely visible through the fog, half hidden behind a curtain of moss and tangled vines. My flashlight beam caught the edge of the doorway, and I swallowed, steeling myself before stepping inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and the scent of decay. I could feel the history here, the weight of time and something darker still, pressing down on me. The artifacts I had seen before, the twisted bones, the carefully arranged stones, were gone. In their place were scattered remnants of past campers. A torn backpack, an old lantern, a child's shoe. And then, on the table, I saw the journal again. The leather cover looked even more weathered, its edges frayed and corners curled as if it had aged decades since I'd last touched it. I reached out with a trembling hand, flipping it open to the first page. The words scrawled there seemed to be written in the same frantic hand, recounting the curse, the presence in the forest, and the creature that watched them all. As I read, a chill washed over me, a growing awareness that this journal was not merely a warning, it was a testament to the countless souls who had crossed paths with the creature and had never left. With each turn of the page, the writing grew more desperate, devolving into incoherent ramblings about a curse bound to the land, a curse that chose its victims and bound them to the forest's will. I heard the hum again, louder this time, vibrating through the cabin walls. I whipped around, my flashlight landing on the doorway, and there it was, the creature, silhouetted against the night, its tall, hunched figure barely human. Its eyes, glowing with that same unnatural light, locked onto mine, and for a moment I felt frozen, as if those eyes held me captive. But there was something different now. It was as if the creature recognized me, like it had been expecting my return. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are they?" I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. "What did you do with my family?" The creature didn't respond, but it moved closer, each step unnaturally fluid, almost as if it was gliding. And then, something strange happened. Its face shifted, melting into a familiar form. For a brief, horrifying moment, it looked like Kamala, her eyes wide and filled with pain. I stumbled back, heart hammering, but the image was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the creature's original, twisted features. It extended a hand, gnarled and clawed, pointing toward the back of the cabin. There, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, a door, half hidden by shadows, slightly ajar. The creature's gaze never wavered, and I knew, somehow, that it wanted me to go through that door. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and pushed it open. On the other side was a narrow, spiraling staircase descending into darkness. Each step creaked under my weight, and the air grew colder the deeper I went, filled with a damp, earthy scent. At the bottom, I found myself in a room carved from stone, the walls covered in strange symbols and markings I couldn't decipher. And there, in the center of the room, was a stone altar, and on it lay a small bundle wrapped in cloth. As I approached, my flashlight flickered again, casting an eerie glow over the bundle. I hesitated, my stomach churning as I reached out, slowly pulling back the cloth. Inside was a photo, one of my family, taken years ago on a camping trip to a different forest. How it had gotten here, I couldn't begin to imagine. But beneath it was something worse, something that made my blood run cold. 3 small, wooden figures, each carved to resemble my wife and sons. They were twisted, bound with strange black cords, their faces carved with expressions of fear. The creature's presence filled the room behind me, and a wave of rage overtook me. I spun around, gripping the knife tightly, determined to do whatever it took to get my family back. Give them back to me. I screamed, the sound echoing off the stone walls. But the creature merely watched, its eyes sad, almost mournful, and it tilted its head as if it pitied me. And then, something in my mind cracked open, a sudden flood of memories not my own, a vision of a family lost in the woods, just like mine, centuries ago. They had wandered here, and the forest had claimed them, bound them to this creature, turning them into guardians of the curse. I realized, horrified, that this creature had once been someone like me, a father who had come searching for his family, only to be twisted and transformed by the forest's dark magic. And now, it wanted to pass on the curse, to free itself by binding me to this place. The faces of Kamala, Joe, and Alex flashed before my eyes again, and I understood what it was offering me. I could stay, take its place, and my family would be released. Or I could leave and let the forest keep its grip on all of us. It was then I felt a tug, a faint, almost imperceptible feeling, like a lifeline pulling me back to the surface, to the clearing where I'd last seen my family. I fought the pull, my gaze locked with the creature's, and it nodded, as if understanding my choice. With one last look at the cursed figure before me, I turned and fled, stumbling back up the staircase, through the cabin, and into the forest, following the thread of that pull. When I burst into the clearing, it was empty. There was no trace of my family, no tent, no fire pit, just an endless stretch of trees. But as I staggered forward, desperate and broken, I caught a whisper, a faint echo of my name on the wind. I followed it blindly, stumbling, until I reached the edge of the forest, the world around me dim and strange, as if it was holding its breath. I turned back once, and for a split second, I thought I saw them, Kamala, Joe, and Alex, standing in the shadows, their eyes wide and silent. And then they were gone, swallowed by the darkness. Now, I sit alone, haunted by that place, by the creature that I somehow know is still waiting for me. And every so often, in the quiet hours, I feel it again, the pull, the whisper of my name, calling me back to the forest, promising that one day I'll return and take my place in its shadows forever. I couldn't escape the forest, not really. I may have driven miles from that cursed place, but I felt its presence like a shadow draped over me, a whisper that grew louder every night. The visions crept into my dreams, twisting my sleep into endless nights spent back in that cursed cabin, face to face with that thing that had once been human. I had seen its eyes, and something inside me knew the truth. I recognized those eyes. They belonged to someone from my past, someone who had faded from my memory, buried under years of neglect. The nightmares left me shaken, haunted, but the memory of my family kept me grounded, pushing me toward answers. I spent weeks trying to piece together what I had seen, combing through old journals, newspapers, and my own memories. But it wasn't until I found an old high school yearbook buried in a dusty box in the attic that the memories resurfaced like a jagged wound torn open. His name was Lawrence Fielding. He'd been a loner, quiet, one of those kids everyone ignored or worse. I could still picture him clearly, the thin, awkward boy with wire-rimmed glasses, always hanging at the edges of things, looking uncomfortable in his own skin. He was the kind of kid people picked on simply because they could, because he was different, weaker. We all played a part in his misery, some of us more than others. I felt a sickening guilt twist in my stomach as I remembered the pranks, the names, the laughter at his expense. Lawrence had disappeared shortly after graduation. No one noticed at first, not really. But he hadn't just left town, he'd vanished without a trace. Some people thought he'd run away, others that he'd taken his own life. But I remembered something now, something I'd almost forgotten, a rumor that Lawrence had gone into the woods, that he'd sought refuge there, claiming it was the only place he felt at peace. That forest, I realized now, had become more than just a refuge for him. It had become his prison, his curse. I didn't want to go back, didn't want to face whatever it was that he had become. But I had to know. I needed to confront whatever twisted fate had bound him to that forest, to understand why he'd taken my family and how to get them back. The forest was still calling, louder than ever now, a relentless pull that wouldn't let me be. And so, one cold, cloudless night, I found myself back at the edge of those woods, bracing myself for the darkness within. As I stepped into the forest, it was as though the trees themselves recognized me, leaning in closer, their branches stretching out like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with mist, heavier than before, and the oppressive silence pressed in from all sides. Each step felt like a descent, a return to some ancient, sacred ground that held secrets older than memory. I followed the same twisted path as before, past the clearing, toward the cabin. The memories of Lawrence tugged at me, an endless stream of half-forgotten moments flashing through my mind. I remembered the way he'd looked in gym class, trying to hide from the other boys. How he would sit alone at lunch, scribbling in a notebook, his eyes downcast, avoiding the jeers that seemed to follow him. I'd been part of it, I realized, part of the darkness that had driven him here. The cabin loomed before me, shadowed and silent, just as it had been that night. But now, it felt different. I sensed a presence inside, awaiting, something aware of me, something that had been watching all along. I gripped the flashlight tighter, steeling myself, and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was colder than before, and the symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly, as though they were alive. I stepped further in, and that's when I saw him. He was sitting in a chair by the window, his form draped in shadow, his eyes reflecting the moonlight with a soft, eerie glow. But it wasn't the creature I remembered, it was Lawrence, or what was left of him. He looked human now, his face pale and thin, his eyes hollow but familiar. He watched me with a strange intensity, and when he spoke, his voice was a low, hollow rasp, as if he hadn't used it in years. "You came back," he said, his lips barely moving. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. "Where are they?" "My family. What did you do with them?" Lawrence tilted his head, his gaze never leaving mine. "They're with me," he whispered, his voice thick with something dark, something broken. "And they'll stay with me, unless you take my place." His words hit me like a blow, and for a moment, I felt my legs weaken. "Take your place?" I asked, struggling to keep the tremor from my voice. "What are you talking about?" Lawrence's face twisted into a bitter smile, his eyes flashing with a deep, ancient sadness. "They never told you, did they? What happens to the ones who become part of the forest, who are bound to it? You were part of it, all of you, mocking me, pushing me until there was nowhere left to go but here." The words cut deep, dredging up memories I'd long buried, things I'd told myself were just harmless fun. But now, looking into his hollow gaze, I could feel the weight of it, the endless years of loneliness and torment we'd forced upon him. I'd helped drive him to this place, and now he was bound to it, cursed to haunt these woods as something twisted and broken, neither alive nor dead. You were here all this time?" I stammered, the reality of it sinking in. "All these years?" He nodded slowly, his expression never changing. "They took me in. The forest saw my pain, my anger. It made me part of it, gave me power, but at a price. I became the forest, bound to its curse, and now, so will you. Unless..." His voice trailed off, and he looked at me, an almost pleading look in his eyes, as though he wanted me to understand. And that's when I realized he didn't want this. He hadn't chosen this fate, he'd been consumed by it, twisted by the forest's darkness, and now he was as much a victim as anyone else. "Unless what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked away, his face contorted with anger and pain. "Unless someone takes my place. That's the only way the curse is broken. A life for a life, bound to the forest. You made me this, and now you have to take responsibility." The weight of his words crushed down on me, and I felt a deep, gnawing horror sink into my bones. This wasn't just about Lawrence's revenge, it was about breaking a cycle that had been festering in the darkness of these woods for generations. And I was faced with a choice that no one should ever have to make: give up my life to free him, or leave, knowing that my family was lost forever. But there was a third option, a terrible, desperate thought that crept into my mind. If Lawrence could be freed by the sacrifice of another, then perhaps he could take someone else's place. Someone who had wronged him, who had helped drive him here. Lawrence seemed to sense my thoughts, a small, sad smile forming on his face. "The curse doesn't work like that," he said softly. "Only the one who accepts it willingly can break it. There's no trick, no easy way out." I stared at him, my mind reeling, trying to grasp the enormity of what he was asking. But deep down, I knew he was right. I couldn't trick my way out of this. I had to make a choice. Slowly, I took a step back, my mind racing. My family, my life, my memories, everything I'd fought so hard for, everything I built. I thought about Camilla, Joe, Alex, the joy on their faces during that last camping trip, and the pain I'd seen in Lawrence's eyes, a pain I'd helped cause. With a deep, shuddering breath, I looked into Lawrence's eyes and nodded. I understood now. I would stay, take his place, break the curse. And as I did, a strange calm washed over me, as if some unseen weight had been lifted. Lawrence stood, his form beginning to fade, his face softening, almost human again. He nodded, and as he vanished into the mist, I felt the forest close in around me, embracing me, pulling me into its depths. I was part of it now, bound by the same curse, forever watching, forever waiting. I don't know how much time has passed. Days, years, centuries. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I see them, strangers, wandering into the woods, looking for answers, seeking something they've lost. And I watch, waiting, hoping that one day, someone will come who is willing to make the same choice, to free me from this endless, silent vigil. Until then, I remain here, bound to the forest, watching, waiting, and remembering.